Motown Records was started by Berry Gordy in the automobile capital of America, Detroit, in 1959. It was to become the most successful record label owned by an African American and would go on to develop a unique blend of soul and pop and produce classic songs performed by a chart-topping roll call of world-revered artists. From the Jackson 5, The Temptations, Smokey Robinson, Stevie Wonder, and Diana Ross to Marvin Gaye, The Four Tops, Gladys Knight, Lionel Richie, and Martha Reeves.
As a new artist, I was overwhelmed just to be there.
I mean, you think 60s, you think Motown.
It came out of the skies into the musician's head. That's where it came from, you know.
It was a unique development in the sense that it was a black entrepreneur developing black talent for black and white audiences.
It was the woodwork, it was the wallpaper, it was everywhere, it was all pervasive.
And before long, it was also in the mind and consciousness of another young man 4,000 miles away in London, who too was on the threshold of a great musical career, fascinated by the Motown music he was hearing in the clubs of Soho, interpreted by such bands as The Who, The Rolling Stones, and The Animals. The seed was sown in his creative imagination that would bear fruit here in this studio near his home in Switzerland over 40 years later.
It was in my blood. Okay, so that's the tempo. Can you make a note, Brad, of 160 for Heat Wave? Heat Wave.
That young man was Phil Collins, a successful solo artist as well as frontman of supergroup Genesis, who has now brought together a unique lineup of musicians to recreate the magic of that original Motown sound and produce an album of his Motown favorites.
When I need love, 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 who'll ease my mind? And I need to find someone to call mine. My mama said, no, you just have to wait. She said, love don't come easy. It's a thing of give and take.
Phil Collins was born in London in 1951 and given a toy drum kit at the age of 5. He spent his teenage years training as an actor by day and listening to bands at Soho's Marquee Club and other venues in the evenings. In March 1965, a slew of Motown artists toured Britain. They included Martha and the Vandellas, The Supremes, Smokey Robinson, and Little Stevie Wonder. The tour was not a financial success, but for many of those who heard the music, a lifelong love affair with Motown began.
That was my life. That was how I grew up. I went to the Marquee and watched that band who did incredible covers of these songs, and The Who as well. They did some. And then the next day went out and bought the records. You know, we kind of learnt all the songs and did it at school shows. You know. Don't you wanna go? One more time. Go into a go.
Berry Gordy, the man who started Motown just 8 years before Phil heard those songs in London, had arrived at his passion for music by a very different route. Born in 1929, his parents had moved, like thousands of other African Americans, from the grinding labor of the cotton fields of the Deep South to work in the automobile factories of Detroit. At the time, Detroit was the largest American city without a significant independent record label. It was a tough young city, gathering people and musical influences from all over America. Berry made his living as a boxer before being drafted in 1951. When he got out 2 years later, he started writing songs and ran a small record store. But the store failed, so he took a job at Lincoln Autos, but he never stopped writing and producing songs. In 1957, he met Smokey Robinson, and shortly afterwards decided to take the risk and set up his own record label, rather than just take the small percentage of the profits offered by the big white-owned companies. So in the 1960s, while Phil Collins was building his record collection, Berry Gordy was building Motown. Among the earliest musicians he auditioned was guitarist Eddie Willis.
Oh, I was scared. I really was shaking. I really was, you know. But eventually, it just went away. It just went away, and things started happening, you know, and it felt good. So they called me back. I said, I believe I'm in. I believe. And I was.
Whoa! You know what you're doing?
Eddie became one of the Funk Brothers, the name given to the backing musicians who developed the Motown sound in the famous Studio A at 2648 West Grand Boulevard. Phil, who has been dreaming of this project for the past 50 years, has not only found Eddie and flown him in from the USA to rehearse and record with him here in Switzerland, he has also recruited two of the Motor City's other Funk Brothers, Bob Babbitt and Ray Monette. How did they join Motown?
A friend of mine went down to a studio called Golden World, which became Motown Studio B later on, of course. He was a little more outgoing than I was. I was rather shy, and so I came down that next evening around 7 or 8 o'clock, and we cut a song called Cool Jerk by the Capitals, and that's when I met Bob Babbitt and Eddie Willis, because they were on that session.
The people that ran the studio, they saw me coming in quite a bit, so one day the main guy's name was Ed Wingate. He pulled me aside and said, "How'd you like to work here? Come and do some sessions for me." I said, oh yeah, great.
Another early recruit was Martha Reeves of Martha and the Vandellas.
Everybody was trying to get to see this wonderful guy named Smokey Robinson, and he was on there with a song called Get a Job, and the next record was Shop Around. So I said, wow, it's a company I'd love to be with.
Shop Around was Motown's first million seller, and the Hitsville studio was still standing in Detroit. Between 1960 and 1972, Motown would release a staggering 120 top 10 hits, and the phrase Motown sound would come to describe the unique chemistry created by Berry Gordy. Grammy Award and Oscar winner Phil Collins has also had a hugely prolific and successful career to date, being one of only 3 artists to have ever sold 100 million albums, both as a solo artist and as a member of a group. But he suffered damage to his hand in 2009 and was taking time out at home in Switzerland with his family until his manager of 37 years, Tony Smith, suggested the Motown album.
I had finished, you know, as far as I was concerned. I didn't care if I just took my kids to school every day, and that was it. Yes, I would have written a few songs, but I don't feel like I need any kind of validation. I've got things that are more important than that, you know. So I was quite happy to stop. And Smith knew what he was doing.
I'm not going to do this.
Why not do a Motown covers album? Bastard!
I can get louder! There we go.
It's your job to know. It's your job to know.
But Phil's manager had concerns, too.
What if the record company don't like it? I said, then no one will need to hear it. I've just paid for the most expensive oil painting. I'll have it hanging in my room, thank you very much. You know, I've made this record, and if it's only me that ever sees that painting, that's fine.
With the big decision made, Phil had to choose his songs, and Berry Gordy's extraordinary ability to discover new talent ensured he had a wealth of material to choose from.
He was able to find these great musicians, find all this great backstage talent, which you call the musicians and the A&R people and the artist development, and then build a structure under which the records will come out on a very consistent basis. So those are 3 pretty formidable skills, and he possessed all of them and manifested them all of them during Motown's glory years.
At the start of those glory years in 1962, Gordy brought together Detroit-born pianist Brian Holland with Lamont Dozier, a gospel choir singer who had recorded for Gordy, and made up the trio with Brian Holland's brother Eddie, another Berry artist. They were to become one of the greatest composing teams ever to come out of America. Holland, Dozier, and Holland produced more #1 songs than any other non-performing team, including 28 top 20 songs in just 3 years between 1963 and 1966.
The first song I chose was In My Lonely Room. It was Lamont Dozier's favourite song, and I remember discussing it with him when we were working together doing Two Hearts back in the 80s. He said, "Oh, I love that song."
But when Phil contacted the Funk Brothers, he realized that recording it was not going to be as easy as he thought.
Then I sent him the demos, you know, and slowly the bad news filtered through about this chord. Actually, it's not this chord, it's that chord. It's a D on the bass, you know, not a B on the bass. But slowly but surely I kind of got demos that I used to say to myself, you know, if I die tomorrow, I'm proud of this.
To get the sound as close to the Motown original as possible has involved a huge personal commitment for Phil, who has driven the project from day one. Before anyone started work here in the studio, he had spent months listening to original recordings, talking to original musicians like the Funk Brothers, and then checking and reworking the written scores.
We'll record what we do tomorrow, so if everyone can, like, remember that we're going to listen to Under the Microscope tomorrow night. Right? These songs are precious, you know, babies. I don't want to just be thrown out there, you know. But we got Darryl and Chester and Brad, who are consummate professionals. We got most of my singers, got 6 singers, and we've got a horn section. Actually, it was crazy. I deliberately went about things in a different way. On some stuff, the drums are mixed pretty low, and it's all down to the tambourine.
It's all right?
All down to the tambourine.
Yeah.
Every single time you take me out with you, you always flirt around with someone new. But I never criticize the tearful things you do, 'cause I'm so afraid of losing you. But in my lonely room, tears I don't have to hide, 'cause I just lock my door and let myself go. Lay right down and cry.
In My Lonely Room was released in 1964 and had the Motown trademark narrative lyrics, real stories far from Moon and June that ordinary people could relate to. Early Motown hits such as Please Mr. Postman and Do You Love Me had a raw R&B sound. But as the 60s progressed, the sound coming out of Detroit showed more skill and craftsmanship in its production. It had truly become the Motown sound.
It came out of the skies into the musician's head. That's where it came from, you know.
You have eye contact with people. And if somebody does something, then maybe you answer them, or you go in between this guy, or sometimes you set the pace. There'll be days when maybe you're the one that, and then all of a sudden everybody's working around you.
It's just one of those things. Why did the Beatles happen? You know, it's like that kind of a thing where something just almost magical came together and just blossomed and just took off like a rocket.
The Motown sound that took off like a rocket had at its heart the drumming of funk brother Benny Benjamin and the bass guitar playing of James Jamerson, with orchestral strings and the beginnings of multi-track overdubbing. Barry, the richly talented talent spotter, had found an apparently unstoppable team.
He had some jokes, but he was basically a serious man who sort of looked at you kind of like with one eye, like he was looking into your soul. And he could tell talent. He could tell people who were talented. He knew how to get the right lyrics for the songs. He knew what sound the drums should have on them.
It was the sound, as they said, of young America. And that didn't mean young black America, young white America, young Indian America, it meant young America, period.
By 1963, Motown was fast acquiring acts, and that year an extraordinary new talent joined Gordy's company, as Martha Reeves remembers.
And this young kid comes to the door. So I noticed him. I said, "Hi, how are you?" He said, "I'm fine." I said, "What's your name?" He said, "Stevie." I said, "Can I help you?" He said, "You sound like a nice person. Who are you?" And as I said, "Martha," he came in and put his fingers all in my face. He says, "You sound like a nice person. Let me see what you look like." There's a little baby piano. He tinkled a little bit of baby music. And at the end of his audition, he went into his pocket and got this harmonica and started playing this harmonica. And Berry Gordy stood there in wonder and said, "This child is a wonder." And they named him then Stevie Wonder.
The young Stevie Wonder had his first #1 with Fingertips Part 2 in August 1963, and just a month later, Martha and the Vandellas scored another great hit with Love Is Like a Heat Wave.
Heat Wave has always been to me the one song that if you had to characterize Motown, would be that, you know. Da 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 da. I mean, the sun just comes out when you hear it. You know, it's a beautiful chord sequence. it's just a great groove, you know.
Whenever I'm with her, something inside.
Martha remembers recording the original Heat Wave at Hitsville.
And Lamont Dozier was playing the keyboard. I learned the song, and we cut it in a couple of takes. There was a DJ in Los Angeles who heard Heat Wave, and he told the world about this heat wave all over the United States, how the temperatures were way above 100 degrees, and then he put on Heat Wave, and it broke our record for us all over the world.
Heat Wave does indeed typify the musical melting pot that was 60s Detroit. From men like Eddie Willis came the blues of the cotton fields, which was mixed with jazz influences from the many clubs of Detroit. Before, Motown recordings had been on only 2 tracks, but the increasingly sophisticated multi-track technology allowed Gordy to keep the vocals foreground, whilst still audibly featuring bass drums and strings. Although Phil and the team have worked hard to dissect the original recordings and replicate the sound, his true judges will be the Funk Brothers who played on the originals. So has Phil pulled it off?
But actually, Babbitt, he said when they were listening back to it, you know, he'd just done his part, he said, you know, I mean, he was talking to the other guys, but he said, you know, this feels better than the original. I mean, and I guess for them, there was an opportunity to do things that maybe had pissed them off over the years, you know. But I got all the compliments, man. I wrote everyone down, and I'm going to put it in my headstone. So did everybody have a nice lunch? Yes. 5-point penalty for interrupting, Lizzie.
I'm sorry.
No, good idea. Good idea. Discuss it afterwards.
1964, the year after Motown released Heat Wave, was the year of the British invasion of America, with a host of British acts climbing the U.S. music charts and the Beatles taking 6 top spots. Motown fought back with the Supremes, who took the #1 spot in July with Where Did Our Love Go? All Motown acts were put through the Artist Development Department, a charm school set up by Gordy, who was aware that white audiences would be less threatened by his black artists if they were not overtly sexual on stage.
It's where they had Professor Maxine Powell teaching us social graces, teaching us to be ladies and gentlemen, and they had Charlie Atkins teaching us major steps where we dance with our feet as opposed to our hips and bodies the way youngsters are dancing today.
And in January 1965, the Temptations, fast-footed graduates of Charlie Atkins, had their first million-seller with My Girl. The Funk Brothers remember that session.
Well, Robert White played that famous line that as soon as you hear it, you know what song you're listening to.
That, and then the guitar comes in. Bow, 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 bow. But forget about the rest of the band. After that, I don't care what you play, because they're singing, I got sunshine. They're singing, you know.
I got sunshine on a cloudy day. And when it's cold outside, I got the month of May. Oh, but I guess you say what can make me feel this way. It's my girl, talking about my girl.
I had a great time doing the backing vocals.
I got so much heart.
And it was the most enjoyable record I've ever made, probably. I mean, I wasn't precious about the material, although I was precious about getting it right, getting it as close to the original. My idea was to make an old record, not make a new record, you know, so the people, when they heard it, they actually thought they got the wrong CD, you know. They'd almost get in the car to take it back. And then my voice would come in and they'd say, oh, okay, it's his new record.
Phil has now been working on the album for 9 months, and with the actual recording completed, there are no plans in place to ever perform in public the songs they have recreated here in the studio. It is time to say goodbye, but Phil Collins is about to be ambushed.
And Eddie said, I just want to say something. And he made a speech and he said, I want to thank you for inviting us. You got a damn good crew. I want to thank you for inviting us over here to play on this album, because this is a damn good project. And I don't think it's going to be bettered. And I want to thank you from my partners. And I'm there nearly in tears, you know. He said, I don't know if we're going to come back, you know, I don't know if we ever get a chance to do this again, but we'd love to. I said, well, there is a chance we may do a showcase. And they kind of, you know, like that. So that's when I made the big mistake by saying to them we were going to do it.
It is a brave decision driven by Phil's passion for Motown and his desire to share the music with his fans. After just 2 weeks further rehearsal, the band arrive in New York to play the songs live. Here at the Roseland Ballroom, they have none of the luxuries of multi-tracking or retakes. It is a true baptism by fire in front of a packed auditorium. Dancing in the Street was written in 1964 by Marvin Gaye, who had joined Motown in 1960. He recorded the vocal himself, but his co-writer had other ideas.
Marvin Gaye had recorded it like a love song. When I first heard it, he was singing it. Calling out around the world, are you ready for a brand new beat, baby? You know, and he asked Mickey, the co-writer, and Ivy Hunter, if they would try it on me. I'd been to Carnival time in New Orleans. I knew what it was like to dance in the street because on my neighborhood, we would put the record players on the front porch, block the streets off, and have street parties. When I finished my first version of it, I looked up in the window and there was Mickey and Marvin celebrating and congratulating themselves, saying, yes, we've got a hit, man, she nailed it.
I'll own up, you know. Some things were difficult to get. You keep me hanging on Dancing in the Street, things that should be no-brainers, you know. But I didn't want to just do rock and roll it, you know. I kind of wanted... Dancing in the Street, man, I mean, that's got the most iconic drum fill. People say, like, da-da-da-da-da-da, forget that. Dancing in the Street has the most iconic drum fill. And we were listening to it, me and Yvonne. Is that a snare drum and then a tom-tom, or is that a tom-tom and then a snare drum? 2 drummers, and we still don't know what it was. You know, it's just very difficult because it's very murky down there, very swampy. But it was fun trying, you know.
By 1965, a year after Dancing in the Street, Gordy's Motown assembly line was consistently pumping out the hits.
I'm telling you, it became a plant, a factory, you know, but as you know, we were really turning them out, man. I mean, turning them out, and they wasn't flops, they were hits, you know. It got to be a real job, you know.
In December 1968, Motown had 5 of the top 10 songs on the Billboard chart.
We could do 3 sessions in one day, there were 3-hour sessions, and we usually tried to get at least 3 songs done, if not 4. And so you ended up doing you did 9 hours there, and then that night you'd be in a club playing too, you know.
In all, 69 Motown songs were to reach the U.S. #1 spot, and between 1960 and 1970, 67% of the singles Motown released hit the charts, against an industry average of just 10%.
Eventually, I ended up, I had to buy a cot because they used to work a lot of 3 o'clock in the morning sessions. Well, if you worked in a club and you weren't done till like 2 in the morning, so then you'd go to the session. And then you'd go home at 6, 7 in the morning and they'd call you back 10 or 11.
In 1965, the Motown hit assembly line also had its first pop video, shot on one of the city's other assembly lines, Nowhere to Run. Nowhere to Run may have been a prophetic title. For years, African Americans had fled the South for cities like Detroit. Now, racial tensions were building in Motown over issues such as police brutality and economic inequality. Although Gordy was never overtly political, he did release an album of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech.
There was definitely a commitment to that. I'm sure he gave tons of money. They did benefit concerts. They gave the NAACP, they gave the civil rights marches. And the fact that they were present on Ed Sullivan, the fact that they were present on Shindig, it was a big deal. Now we take for granted that, you know, black folks are on this and black folks on that and Jay-Z this and Beyonce that, but that was not the case then. This is all very historic stuff.
Both the Funk Brothers and Martha Reeves were aware of the racial tensions and of the power of the Motown music to diffuse them.
There were certain areas in around the Detroit area where they didn't really accept the black people even being in those areas, let alone living in those areas. It was pretty rough, pretty rough. But I never felt anything working with them as far as like, no racial thing, you know. I think when it comes down to it, it's inside what counts, you know.
When they played the show, everybody showed up, no matter what, and loved it. You know, it was fantastic. So the music bridged that gap, at least momentarily, at least for the show.
Even though some of the people were mean before we got to the stage, things would change once we started singing the Motown sound. And as we traveled to the next area, the next city, that separation was ended. We saw it happen. We saw people change and start enjoying the music, realizing that we're all united and we're all equal and we can all have a good time. And the Motown sound had a lot to do with it.
By 1965, Motown was also recording in New York and Los Angeles, and sometimes even on the road when bands' rigorous schedules left no room for studio time. One of the bands sending recordings back to Hitsville was the Four Tops, and in 1965, they recorded another Holland-Dozier-Holland collaboration, Something About You.
Yeah, there's something about you, baby, makes me love just a little bit more. Truly love just a little bit more. Sweet, sweet thing, satisfied. Sweet, sweet thing, so
On Sunday, July 23, 1967, the racial tensions in Detroit finally overflowed onto the streets, following an overzealous police raid on an illegal drinking club known as a Blind Pig. At the time, Ray Monette was on stage at Detroit's Fox Theater in the Motown Revue.
I was the only white person in the whole place, and the riots came off. We heard gunshots, we heard things going on. A security guard came up to me, and he said, and all the guys in the band too, they were saying, listen, man, you gotta get out of here. You gotta go back to the suburbs, whatever, you know, get out of this area. And the security guards escorted me to my car and got me out safely. But it was like a war zone. It's just the strangest thing I've ever seen.
The Army and National Guard were called in to put down the riot. By the time they left, there were 43 dead, 467 injured, 7,200 arrested, and over 200 buildings had been destroyed. In that same year, Smokey Robinson wrote one of his most successful songs ever about sadness and loss. Bob Babbitt played at the recording session in the still devastated city.
But I think that particular bass line kind of moved that record along, where it was, you know, like a choo-choo train. Pop, doom, down, pop, boom, pop.
And tonight you're going to hear Mr. Bob Babbitt play that bass line. He wrote it, he played it, and now you're going to listen to it. It's called Tears of a Clown.
1970, Motown had come a long way from the R&B roots of the early days. The Funk Brothers were now working like one super musician. Bonded together in a single integrated unit, they had the confidence to take on forms far from the R&B roots of Motown. Stevie Wonder and Sarita Wright's achingly evocative Never Dreamed You'd Leave in Summer was 10 years and a world away from the dancehall sound of early Motown.
I mean, things like Never Dreamed You'd Leave in Summer, you know, I must have heard it. It was a B-side, you know, Stevie Wonder B-side. He did it at Michael Jackson's funeral, which I'm sure is why people think I'd done it, but I actually had recorded it before them. And it's just a staggeringly good song. Yeah, there's this. Good songs make you sing well. You got to deliver, you know. I mean, especially if you're living up to. I mean, Stevie Wonder stuff. I mean, you know, you only if you can get away with it, good. But you know, they're not easy to do. But that makes you lift your game. So each song had its own particular little hurdle to cross from a, you know, either what's the bass drum doing, or trying to get to nail the vocal. You know, it was just, but that made it fun, and I came out of the whole thing with tremendous respect for the way it was put together.
But by 1972, it was clear that songs weren't going to be put together at Motown in Detroit anymore. Music just wasn't big enough for Berry Gordy. He wanted to develop film projects, such as Lady Sings the Blues with Diana Ross in Hollywood. And to do this, he almost exclusively moved his operation to Los Angeles.
It wasn't about that little, you know, room on West Grand Boulevard anymore. It was about the possibilities of what LA offered.
A sign was pinned to the door of the famous Studio A, where some of the greatest hits of the 20th century had been recorded, announcing that recordings were to be rescheduled, but they never were.
You see this big old note on the door. It's, you know, there was no work here today. Motown has moved out. That's what it said.
When Berry left, I felt abandoned. I don't know what it was, but it seemed like the economy went with him. People who would bring furs to my house and give me credit without me even having to sign for it stopped letting me even get a credit card. It's almost like my family had left when Berry Gordy left Detroit. The mood changed. People didn't like us very well. They were angry. And they took it out on those of us who dared stay. And most of the artists have moved out of Detroit because there's not the love anymore.
One of the last songs to come out of Detroit was Papa Was a Rolling Stone. Appropriately, it was produced by one of the magic men of Motown, Norman Whitfield, an ex-teenage hustler from the pool halls of Harlem who was spotted by Berry and eventually took over from producer Smokey Robinson, developing the next stage of the Motown sound in the late 60s.
Norman was innovative, and he wanted to, cutting edge, and he wanted to bring in new sounds and new things. So they brought in, the fuzz tone guitar was used on several of the records, and the wah-wah, anything new, something new and exciting, and that's just what he wanted.
It was a very seminal song, that kind of came around at the same time as Shaft, and it had a attitude thing, And of course, Ray came in and went, whack. First take. I said, I can't. And then he copped all the guitar licks. And the three of them, they like to play together, which is the way they used to do it at Motown.
It was the 3rd of September, that day I'll always remember. Yes, I will. 'Cause that was the day that my daddy died.
Phil did play drums on the album, despite his bad hand, but was unsure that he could reproduce the sound that Motown legendary drummer Benny Benjamin had produced.
We were listening back to it, and Eddie said, "Who played drum on this?" So I said, "I did." He said, "Damn good." Made my day. It made my week, That's all I ever wanted anybody to say about this. Damn good, man. You sound like Benny, man. You sound like Benny.
Wherever he laid his hat was his home. And when he died, all he left was alone. Nothing but bad things about him. Was a rolling stone. Wherever he laid his hat was his home.
Phil's hero, drummer Benny Benjamin, one of the architects of the Motown sound, died from heroin addiction in 1968. The legendary bass guitarist James Jamerson died in autumn 1983. The Hitsville studio is silent. So what is left today in Detroit from the glory days of Motown? How has a new generation been influenced? Mick Collins leads Detroit punk band The Dirt Bombs.
My family likes to say that when I was born, Shotgun by Junior Walker and the All-Stars was on. I was born in December of 1965, and so they say, well, that was always on the radio. More than just about any other kind of music, it has absolutely influenced the music that I write in terms of the rhythms I like to use, the chord progressions and chord changes that I like to use. It's just there. It's, it cannot be extricated from me. Those songs will never date. Those songs will always sound new. The Motown sound is often imitated but never duplicated.
Sharon Jones is a funky soul singer who records and tours with the in-house Daptone Records band, the Dap Kings.
As a little girl, I would put the record on and just sing that song so I could sound like them. Hit their notes the way they hit it, drop it, and that was my practice. Just sit and listen to. They keep calling me retro. I'm like, retro? Retro is some little young kid trying to imitate someone. I'm not imitating. When I open my mouth, soul comes out.
This is the empty mansion Gordy left behind in Detroit. Looking back down the 50-plus years since he founded Motown, there can be no doubt that it has become tightly woven into both the musical and social fabric of America, leaving a formidable legacy.
I think almost everyone I know who I've ever encountered from film, TV, music, who's black in entertainment still thinks of Motown as the ultimate symbol of success. Because it generated stars, it generated hits. It was mainstream American culture, not just black culture. They want to be Berry Gordy in some way, shape, or form. He's still the template for all of that.
The three Funk brothers, who were never credited during the 60s on any of those Motown hits, very much appreciate that their work and pivotal role is now being widely recognized. At home in Nashville, Bob Babbitt is literally passing the Detroit music on to a young student, Sam Hunter.
That's the start of something right there. Yeah.
Ray Monette still lives in the Motor City, just a short guitar lick from Hitsville. The camaraderie of the album recording and a trip back on the road for the concerts has provided an evocative and memorable journey for them all. For Phil, this has been a doubly emotional journey. Not only has he devoted enormous passion and energy to replicating the Motown songs he fell in love with in his teens, he has also found a way back to the warm, halcyon days of his English childhood. And although the last song in the concert set is not a Motown song at all, its lyrics summarize the emotions they have all felt over the past few months together. I think I'm going back.
Think I'm returning to
When I was singing it,
those days when
I found myself getting very emotional singing it. For this, I don't know why. I think it's the lyrics.
to only pass the time. No more electric trains, no more trees to climb.
With my mum. It's just you start thinking about childhood and, you know. So it's one of my favourite songs, and I suppose that's one of the reasons why people chose it as a single, is because it sounds a bit more Phil Collinsy than the rest of it.
I can recall the time when I wasn't ashamed to reach out to a friend. Now I think I've got a lot more than just my toys to lend. Now there's more to do than watch my sailboat fly, and every day can be my magic paradise, and I can play hide and seek with my fear, and live my days instead of counting my years.
We came close as we could, because all the guys weren't there, but it came out all right to me. With he done scuffled himself down to sound like these other guys. What else could you want? You couldn't beat that. And then just add us with it, you're gonna get what you want, And he did. He's in his clouds, man, really.
That he pulled it off and made it sound exactly like Benny Benjamin, Uriel Jones, and Pistol Allen. All three of the Motown drummers. He got them all to a T. I think it's incredible, actually.
I've made a record with the people that made the records. Is really it's the knot, if you like, at the end of the rope, that ties the beginning to the end.
Berry Gordy has said of Motown, it was built on love and competition. And sometime the competition got in the way of the love, but the love always won out.
I'm going back to the easy, walking away. I'm going back. I'm going back to my youth. Oh yes, I'm going back. I'm going back. Going back to my youth. Come on, catch me, 'cause I'm going back. I'm going back.
And it was just a great experience, frankly. Wouldn't have missed it for the world.
Neither would the Funk Brothers.